I'm here with comic book creator Paul Hoppe. How are you doing today, sir?
Very good, thank you. How are you today, Robert?
Very good. Can you please tell our viewers at home about your work?
Well, I am an illustrator. I illustrate picture books. I do assignments for editorial, for magazines and newspapers. I also work in advertising a little bit, and I do children's books and comics. I like to tell stories with my pictures. Some of the work is self-published. Others I work with actual real publishers.
And how did you get started in writing comics and writing in general?
I think I was pretty much as a kid, as a teenager, I was introduced to comics, and that got me started to draw. That was just very inspiring to me. Growing up in Germany, it was maybe slightly different things than it would be here in America. But I also got a lot of, later I read a lot of Marvel comics, the classics, and I always wanted to draw then, and so I pursued, I studied graphic design, and I got my MFA in illustration here in America. And so I started being an illustrator, but then I came back to comics because it seems just something that I'm very passionate about.
You mentioned that you read a lot of Marvel comics and the like. Did you have any particular inspirations that moved you towards your works?
Well, I think, as a kid, there were certain comics that I loved, and then and I kind of went away from it more towards indie comics for a while, and then I think in the last 5-10 years I kind of came back to the things I read as a teenager. So back in the day it was Spider-Man and the Avengers, I think, written by people like David Michelin, Roger Stern, for example, and then drawn by the Buscema brothers, and but then also people like Eric Larson, inkers like Tom Palmer. So it's kind of the 80s, but still with a very much tradition of like the 70s still in them. And then later I looked at a lot of indie artists, but also a lot of European artists actually. That Möbius, Jacques Tardy was for a while very I liked, and then here people like Chris Ware and Daniel Klaus I've also enjoyed.
And you have some comedic books like Journey into Misery. How would you say that your comedic style is?
Well, I guess it's somewhat satirical. But I have a lot of love with the materials that I'm sort of riffing off. Like I'm obviously also having fun with it. That's very important for me. But I also think the comics that I read back then, the old Marvel and DC comics, there was a lot of positive attitude in them. They had their problems, of course. I mean, Stan Lee's characters were always also had their difficulties and a crisis. But somewhat at the end of the day, there was something positive and joyful about the stuff. So I try to, I think, emulate that. I like drawing, so I work with ink and pen and ink and things like that. I just love how ink looks on paper, and so the work is very, right now it's more black and white. And yeah, I mean, the characters get into ridiculous situations and try to make their ways out of it. But I don't think it's like a straight parody either. I don't think that I'm doing that like as if Mad Magazine would do it. I guess it's a more satirical, playful dealing with the material, and with a lot of love for it.
You also have a couple of children's books here to sell. How do you find writing children's books is different from writing your regular comic book works?
I mean, it is, I guess, in a way, children's books feel to me like short picture stories. But in general, I always like to talk about the similarities, actually, of it. I feel because it's both picture stories. You're telling stories with with words and with images, which both comics and children's book do. What I love about children's books is they are sort of short stories that are very compressed. It's not so much text in many cases. It has beginning, middle, and end in a way that I really enjoy, that you can keep it short and focus on the most important core of the story, which I think is a strength of mine, and that's why I enjoy, like, these are not, I like them to be not super long. I like to keep them in chapters, and children's books are also not that long. You really focus on the best possible story and boil it down on that. But of course it has differences, as in, you know, in a children's book you have an image that goes over the whole page, which in comics you would call the splash page. So in a way you tell a story entirely with splash pages. So that of course is a little different. The rhythm is a little different, but in general I think think it's very related. Like there are, but of course, you know, also the market, as if you want to talk about the market, is different. The rules in that particular publishing world is a little different than in comics. So there are differences. I also work slightly differently, so I use watercolor for these. Whereas with the comics I work black and white, and if I do color I keep it very graphic. Like with these covers, for example, I have the interior art is black and white, but like on the covers I like to work with colored paper. So but it's a very sort of minimal way of using color. And then I have these rubber stamps that I pull out the white with. So I use limited color. I actually, in all of my work, I like to use limited color, but especially in the comics where you have multiple images per se, I like to, you know, do a little bit less. For example, in the graphic novel that will come out, Peanut, that will come out in January, I used there's two spot colors in it, so there's no black, but a very dark blue, and then this very bright pink. So the pink is usually used for the main character, and it's a way to guide you through the story. But sometimes there are pages with almost no or even no pink, and I like sort of that rhythm. But I feel like this sort of limited color approach works very well with comics, because comics are already very complex, and to kind of boil it down a little bit, simplify stuff, but still adding depth and life to it is a thing that I enjoy.
Well, thank you very much for talking with us. I hope you have a great time here at the New York Comic Con.
Welcome. Thank you for visiting my table.